In March 2024, a team of civil engineers surveying a decommissioned coastal defense site near Peenemünde, Germany, broke through a reinforced concrete slab buried deep beneath the sand. What they exposed was no ordinary storage chamber, but a sealed vault untouched since the final days of World War II. The walls were lined with corroded steel plates, stamped with Reichsmarschall insignia and the faded code Project Morgenrot. Inside, amid frozen air and rusted machinery, investigators recovered reels of film, experimental blueprints, and handwritten test logs referencing propulsion data decades ahead of its time. Within weeks, the site was seized by the Bundesarchiv under emergency classification orders. But one unmarked canister, mislabeled in transit and later leaked to a private researcher in Berlin, hinted at something far more disturbing, a covert wartime project that may have shaped the early foundations of post-war rocket science and rewritten the origins of the space race itself. Chapter 1. The Vault Beneath Peenemünde. The first entry in the Bundesarchiv incident report, marked File 24-3 PMV, describes the vault's discovery as an unauthorized breach during civilian works. By the time federal authorities arrived, the original excavation team had already uploaded photographs to a regional archaeology forum. The images vanished within hours, scrubbed by a takedown order traced to a military IP block in Bonn. What remains are fragments, an engineer's email chain, a deleted drone clip, and a blurry still showing the vault's door partially ajar. Its steel warped inward, as if something had once forced its way out rather than in. In the following days, the area surrounding the Peenemünde test fields was sealed off. Local police cited environmental contamination, but satellite imagery revealed a growing cluster of temporary structures, generators and lead-lined containers stamped with the insignia of the Federal Office for Radiation Protection. Forensic geologists later determined that the soil around the site contained traces of liquid oxygen, nitrogen tetroxide, and a synthetic compound unknown in 1944. Within a week, the site's jurisdiction quietly shifted from state to federal oversight. The vault itself measured 9 meters by 11, divided into 2 levels. The upper section contained the remains of an elevator shaft and racks of glass tubing fused by heat. The lower chamber, reached only after robotic entry, held a rusted cylindrical device, roughly 3 meters long, half submerged in groundwater. On its casing were remnants of a painted emblem, a crimson sun emerging from a black horizon. Beneath the word Morgenrot, the same codename appeared in a small binder found nearby, its pages waterlogged but partially legible. One entry, dated February 14, 1945, referenced Stage 4 ignition testing and compensatory acceleration under hypersonic load. Historians cross-referenced the terminology with known V2 research but found anomalies. The equations suggested a propulsion cycle that included staged plasma ignition, an impossibility for the 1940s. The handwriting belonged to Dr. Heinrich Albrecht, a lesser-known engineer once stationed at Peenemünde West, officially recorded as killed in an air raid in March 1945. Yet, post-war Allied records list a Henry Albright, employed at White Sands Proving Ground in 1948. Weeks after the discovery, an independent journalist named Lena Krauss received a flash drive mailed anonymously from a Berlin postmark. It contained high-resolution scans of the recovered blueprints and a typed memorandum, redacted but dated 1962, from the US Department of Defense to NASA's Office of Advanced Research. The subject line read, Technical Annexes, Morgenrot, cross-reference, paperclip Appendix F. The contents suggested that sections of Albrecht's research were quietly integrated into early propulsion modeling under a different name. Krauss's subsequent exposé draft, The German Equation, was never published. She vanished 2 months later during a trip to Poland, last seen boarding a regional train near Szczecin. Modern analysts attempting to reconstruct the Morgenrot apparatus discovered traces of alloys containing niobium and titanium, metals rare in Europe during the 1940s but present in post-war American stockpiles. The working theory proposed that late-stage Nazi engineers were experimenting with plasma-assisted acceleration, technology far beyond their time. Yet the project's notes end abruptly on February 20, 1945, with a single, cryptic line scrawled across the final page. Bunker evacuated, Morgenrot relocated, contact suspended. Interviews with elderly residents of the nearby village of Karlshagen yielded one recurring story: a convoy of black trucks departing the island under SS escort days before Soviet forces arrived. None of the vehicles were ever recorded in military manifests. A fisherman claimed that one truck was ferried to sea on a barge that never returned. Soviet occupation records later referenced a secondary structure identified as Facility 12, sealed and flooded under the directive of Marshal Zhukov. For decades, it remained unexamined beneath the Baltic mud. By 2024, following the discovery of the vault, divers from the German Maritime Research Institute began scanning the seabed near the coordinates listed in Soviet archives. 54°0810N, 13-45E. The sonar results revealed an anomaly, metallic, elongated and consistent in dimension with the missing Morgenrot device. Despite repeated recovery attempts, the site was reclassified under NATO maritime jurisdiction in May 2025, effectively halting all civilian research. In a leaked transcript from an internal Bundesarchiv meeting, one analyst described the Peenemünde vault as a technological ghost, evidence of something that should not have existed. Another added, if Morgenrot reached completion, it changed hands before the war ended. The math didn't disappear. It migrated. The same month, fragments of correspondence surfaced online between a US defense subcontractor and a European aerospace consortium, referencing legacy propulsion matrices, derived from historic German research. The last public statement from the German Ministry of Defense came in late 2024. The materials recovered at Peenemünde pertain to historical research of limited scientific value. All findings remain under review. No further documents were released, but in quiet circles of historians, physicists, and intelligence veterans, the story of the vault beneath Peenemünde remains an open wound, a reminder that the border between discovery and secrecy is as thin and corrosive as the steel that once sealed the forgotten chamber beneath the Baltic dunes. Chapter 2. The Morgenrot Correspondence Files. 3 months after the Peenemünde vault was sealed under federal order, a data leak from an anonymous source calling themselves Archive 47 appeared briefly on a closed historical research forum hosted in Zurich. The post contained a download link to a compressed archive of scanned documents labeled Morgenrot Correspondenz 1945 to 1948. Within hours, the files were deleted and the account was disabled. Still, a handful of researchers managed to capture the contents before the purge. What they revealed was a collection of typewritten letters, coded telegrams, and shipping manifests spanning from February 1945 to late 1948, bearing signatures from names connected to both Nazi Germany and early American aerospace programs. The first document, stamped Reichsluftfahrtministerium Abt E9 and dated March 3, 1945, was addressed to SS Obergruppenführer Kammler, the same man who oversaw the V2 program and later disappeared without trace. The letter references successful relocation of Phase 4 components and secure transfer via Baltic route, designation Morgenrot. Marginal notes in English, written in pencil decades later, translate certain phrases. Phase 4 composite propulsion, array, and Baltic route. Naval extraction via Operation Eclipse. The C, annotation style and paper stock match, those found in declassified Operation Paperclip files from 1947. Someone had studied these letters before and quietly refiled them. A second letter, dated May 9, 1945, just 1 day after Germany's official surrender, originates from Lübeck and is addressed to a Mr. H. Albright, care of U.S. Engineer Corps, Frankfurt. The content is unnerving. Unit components intact. Awaiting confirmation for further testing in controlled facility. The prototype remains operational but unstable. The line is followed by an indecipherable string of numeric codes, later interpreted by linguist Dr. Konrad Geiss as geographic coordinates pointing toward the White Sands missile range in New Mexico. The implication was staggering. Either the Morgenrot propulsion device, or parts of it, had been successfully transferred west before Soviet forces reached the Baltic. Coast investigators from the German Historical Reconstruction Project, GHRP, began to cross-reference these communications with customs ledgers from the US War Department. In a record dated August 1946, an entry describes the arrival of industrial turbine components, experimental origin, code designation M24PEM, Adjacent entries mention Dr. Werner von Braun's team, already relocated under Operation Paperclip, yet no record of Albrecht or Albright exists under that roster. When the GHRP petitioned the US National Archives for access to supplementary appendices of Paperclip documentation, they were told those materials were reclassified in 1987 and remain under Department of Defense control. Among the recovered digital scans, one page stood out. It was labeled Morgenrot, Annex B, Correspondence between Technical Liaison and Civilian Agency, redacted. The recipient field was blacked out entirely, but the sender's typewritten signature was unmistakable. HA 150447. The contents discussed test anomalies specifically, that repeated ignitions of the Stage 4 hybrid array produced extreme magnetic interference and physical instability in proximity sensors. The note concluded, recommends suspension until atmospheric isolation possible. To aerospace engineers, that phrasing implies vacuum testing, meaning the prototypes were being evaluated for use outside Earth's atmosphere. By late 2024, intelligence journalists tracing the Morgenrot files found that several of the corresponding US test reports, long assumed to describe early jet engines, carried identical formatting and serial conventions. One in particular, Report MX7742, referenced an experimental Stage 4 propulsion assembly provided under classified European directive. The footnotes, still redacted, cited source material translated from German originals, RLM E9 archives. Only after the Peenemünde vault discovery did those abbreviations take on new meaning. The surviving Morgenrot correspondence included personal letters from Albrecht himself. One, dated November 1946 and addressed to an unnamed recipient, reads, "I have seen what our work can do. It bends the air around it, burns white against the horizon. They say it is for the future, but I know it is still born of the war. We left the blood behind, not the ghosts." Experts believe these words were written shortly before his official relocation to the United States under a false identity. The original letterhead carries an embossed seal of the Technische Hochschule Darmstadt, suggesting he maintained access to academic networks even after the Reich's collapse. Forensic analysis of the scanned materials conducted by metadata specialist Tobias Wren revealed that the documents had been rephotographed on Kodak, microfilm stock produced in 1961, 16 years after the original correspondence. This indicated a secondary archiving phase, likely part of NATO's classified intelligence sharing initiative, Operation Registry. If true, it means the Morgenrot materials were intentionally preserved, not destroyed, and circulated among Western allies during the early Cold War. As historians worked to authenticate the cache, an unexpected visitor arrived at the GHRP's Berlin office, a retired Bundeswehr officer named Major Erich Voss, age 87. Voss claimed to have served at Peenemünde during post-war clearance operations in 1952. In his deposition, recorded on February 3, 2025, he described discovering a sealed iron crate containing documents in multiple languages and an American-made field recorder. He was ordered to deliver it to a US liaison team under the command of Captain Henry A. Bright. Voss remembered the name because the man refused to shake his hand. Voss's testimony, coupled with the recovered correspondence, convinced investigators that Morgenrot did not end in 1945. It transformed, absorbed into early post-war aerospace research. The name was erased, its symbols removed, but its engineering lineage persisted under other banners. By the time of the first US satellite launches, the mathematics behind Morgenrot's propulsion arrays were already public knowledge, but their origin remained buried in classified annexes. One final page from the correspondence stands as the most disturbing, a technical requisition form dated October 1948, requesting biological endurance data under variable atmospheric compression. It bore both American and German institutional seals. Beneath the form's signature block, a handwritten note in English reads, "Request deferred. Recommend human trials postponed until stable prototype achieved." The request was never approved, or so the archives claim. Yet, among the blurred photographs attached to the file, one image shows a test chamber with a single chair, bolted to the floor, surrounded by heat-scorched walls. Today, the Morgenrot correspondence remains under restricted access within the Bundesarchiv, sealed under the temporary designation PEM-ZEM 45. Unofficially, its existence has become a whisper among defense historians. The story of how a project born in the ashes of the Reich may have ignited the first sparks of the space age, leaving behind a paper trail of coded letters and unspoken complicity stretching across 2 continents. Chapter 3: The Baltic Extraction Route. By mid-2025, investigators from the GHRP and a joint maritime research task force turned their attention to a theory first raised in the Morgenrot correspondence: that the propulsion device, or its components, had been smuggled out of Germany in the final weeks of the war via the Baltic coast. The operation, allegedly overseen by SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, remained a historical grey zone. Soviet archives referenced a fleet of civilian vessels commandeered for technical evacuation, but none of the official shipping logs survived. What did exist, however, were fragments of intercepted naval transmissions recovered from a British SIGINT station near Scarborough, dated April 28–30, 1945. Among the decrypted fragments was a single phrase repeated across multiple frequencies: Morgenrot convoy, proceed under Eclipse directive. The phrase Operation Eclipse referred officially to the Allied plan for occupying Germany after surrender, but its use here suggested a different context entirely. Through British National Archives FO 1093-276, researchers discovered a post-war report listing a convoy of 5 merchant vessels that left Peenemünde on April 29, 1945. 4 were destroyed by Soviet aircraft. The 5th, identified as the Hermann Ehrhardt, vanished north of Rügen Island. Declassified aerial reconnaissance photos taken by the RAF 3 days later show debris consistent with an explosion at sea, yet no wreckage was ever recovered. In 1950, Soviet naval divers claimed to have located metallic anomalies along the seabed near those same coordinates, but the expedition records ended abruptly. In the summer of 2024, sonar imaging conducted by the German Maritime Research Institute returned echoes of an elongated structure buried beneath 30 meters of silt at coordinates 54°8 N, 13–45 E, the same position listed in Kammler's encrypted correspondence. When a team of divers reached the site, they found twisted steel plating resembling a ship's hull. Among the sediment was a circular hatch marked with faint stenciling: Morgenrot, Einheit 4. Radiation levels spiked near the hatch's seams, forcing the divers to abort. Within days, the operation was placed under NATO maritime jurisdiction, citing environmental hazard. The research vessel Odin II that discovered the anomaly was recalled to port, its crew bound by non-disclosure agreements. Months later, an anonymous insider from the project leaked partial sonar scans and internal memos. One memo, dated June 17, 2024, confirmed recovery of machined composite structures, inconsistent with known 1940s metallurgy. Another referenced the discovery of a sealed cylindrical device resembling the same object found in the Peenemünde vault. The device, however, had been severely damaged, its casing fractured inward. Spectrographic analysis identified trace amounts of niobium and a previously unclassified synthetic polymer, possibly an early form of ablative heat shield material. How such materials appeared in a 1945 shipwreck remains unexplained. Historical context provided additional intrigue. According to the diary of Captain Wilhelm Theodor, commander of the Hermann Ehrhardt, the ship was requisitioned by the Waffen-SS in April 1945 under the pretense of scientific evacuation. Theodor wrote of transporting sealed cargo of unknown origin, guarded by 12 men in black uniforms bearing no insignia. His final entry, April 29th, reads, "Departed Peenemünde under orders of Kammler. Cargo secured in lower hold. Rumors claim it burns without flame." The diary ends there. Theodor's body was never recovered, but his wife later reported receiving an unsigned telegram stating, "The cargo reached its destination." Cross-analysis of declassified Soviet naval logs from 1946 revealed that the Red Fleet deployed minesweeper units to the Rügen area months after the supposed sinking. The mission objective was listed as recovery of technical assets. Soviet divers retrieved multiple steel containers, 2 of which were transported to Leningrad. In 1957, KGB archives record their transfer to a facility outside Novgorod under Operation Oriol. The files were classified until 1993, when the archive was partially opened. However, all documents related to Oriol had already been removed, The last inventory note from 1961 mentions sealed cargo, origin unspecified. Atomic notation present by late 2024, with the Peenemünde vault uncovered and Morgenrot research re-emerging, the Baltic extraction theory became more than speculation. Maritime historians mapped possible escape routes used by Kamler's units. A pattern emerged. Each point of evacuation corresponded with areas later restricted by Soviet or NATO forces. In particular, the Rügen anomaly fell within a post-war exclusion zone established under the pretext of submarine decontamination. Analysts began to suspect that both sides of the emerging Cold War had agreed, informally, to leave certain sites untouched. Among the materials leaked from the Odin 2 mission was a high-resolution sonar image showing the fractured hull section. Along the curvature of the metal plating, faint lettering was visible, numbers resembling a US Army inventory code, ORD 48 1172. This detail drew immediate attention from American researchers, as the prefix ORD was used by the US Army Ordnance Department for classified imports under Operation Paperclip. The implication was that at least one Morgenrot artifact recovered from the Baltic was subsequently transferred to US custody and catalogued decades later under an innocuous ordnance record. Eyewitness testimony added further layers of mystery. In 1965, a retired Soviet naval engineer named Viktor Levin gave a closed interview to Pravda Vostok, later archived but never published. In the transcript, Levin describes being part of a recovery dive off Rügen in the early 1950s. We found a cylinder of strange metal. Our Geiger counters spiked even when sealed. Moscow ordered immediate containment. They said it was a German reactor experiment, but it was not a reactor. It was silent, cold, and humming. His account was dismissed at the time as propaganda embellishment, yet the technical precision of his description aligns eerily with the recovered components catalogued in 2024. The deeper investigators probed, the more interference they encountered. German maritime records from 2024 through 2025 show sudden funding withdrawals and missing data entries. Emails between Bundesarchiv staff mention an international directive to suspend excavation for safety reasons. Unofficially, NATO liaison briefings referenced containment instability and unknown isotopic decay behavior. One senior official, speaking under anonymity, summarized it bluntly. "We're not sure what we pulled out of that sea, but it's still active." Satellite imagery taken in early 2025 revealed a new fence perimeter near the Peenemünde coast, guarded by Bundeswehr units. Locals reported the arrival of unmarked containers during nighttime transports. Each bore the same red sun symbol first documented on the Morgenrot vault door. To date, neither Germany nor its allies have acknowledged the existence of those shipments. But for the few who have studied the Baltic extraction files, the conclusion seems inescapable. Morgenrot did not vanish in the war's final chaos. It was moved, piece by piece, through smoke and salt water, into the shadows of a new era that was only just beginning. Chapter 4. The Kamler Disappearance Records. In January 2025, a classified document surfaced briefly on the internal database of the Czech National Archive before being removed. It was labelled Archivbestand 12 Kam 3, Technische Räumung Peenemünde. The document was a debriefing transcript from a 1946 Soviet interrogation of captured SS administrative staff. One line, partially redacted, stood out. Kamler departed via alternate route. Cargo designated Morgenrot confirmed transferred to Western Contact, designation HA. It was the first written record linking Hans Kamler, the elusive overseer of Nazi advanced weapons projects, directly to the mysterious propulsion program, and to an individual bearing the same initials as Heinrich Albrecht. Kamler's final days have always been a historical riddle. Officially declared dead near Prague on May 9, 1945, his body was never found. Multiple witnesses claimed he shot himself. Others insisted he was captured by the Americans. The Peenemünde discovery revived those theories. Investigators at the GHRP uncovered a copy of US Army Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, Phil 47245, marked Top Secret, Eyes Only. Within it were field reports dated June 1945 describing exfiltration of technical assets and secured custody of high-ranking engineering personnel. The officer of record, Captain Henry A. Bright, an alias investigators now suspect, created for Albrecht's paperclip identity. In cross-examining the CIC reports with Soviet defector testimony from 1962, researchers reconstructed a chilling timeline. On May 2, 1945, Kamler's convoy departed the Skoda complex near Prague, bound for the Baltic. Soviet forces intercepted one column, but a smaller detachment disappeared northward, carrying classified cargo of experimental nature. By mid-May, American units advancing from the west had established contact near Flensburg, where a temporary technical custody facility operated under the OSS. No public record of that installation exists, but a requisition form discovered in the U.S. National Archives. Box 32, Folder X122 lists temporary habitation structures, Peenemünde sector, Phase 4 intake. During spring 2024, journalist Lena Kraus, before her disappearance, filed a series of encrypted messages to a colleague in Hamburg. Her final communication included a photograph of a carbon copy telegram dated June 18, 1945, sent from the OSS Liaison Office, Frankfurt, to the US War Department. The message read, "K in custody, transfer complete, awaiting new identity clearance under existing directive." The signature block was blank, save for a single letter, A. For decades, historians assumed K referred to a lower-ranking engineer, but Krause's photograph showed the heading, Subject, Kammler, Hans Dr. Ing. In the months following her disappearance, no trace of Krause's original sources emerged. However, the Bundesarchive's metadata logs show a download of Archivbestand 12 Kamler3 from her IP address only 48 hours before she vanished. The file's checksum indicates it was copied twice, once to her encrypted cloud storage and once to an external drive seized during a police raid in Szczecin. That drive is now in federal custody, its contents sealed under judicial order. Unconfirmed leaks suggest it contained several microfilm images labeled Project Halberd Annex. Forensic historians studying paperclip personnel rosters noted another anomaly. In a payroll ledger dated October 1947, a new consultant was added to the U.S. Army Ordnance Department under the name Henry K. Amsler. His qualifications read Specialist in Guided Propulsion Systems. The handwriting used to fill his personnel form matched signatures from Kamler's surviving field orders. By 1950, the same name appeared as an advisor on Project MX774, the very program cited in the Morgenrot correspondence. The timeline aligns too perfectly to dismiss as coincidence. Meanwhile, Soviet archives tell a parallel story. A KGB memo from 1953, declassified after the collapse of the USSR, references the defection of primary German engineer Asset to Western custody with knowledge of propulsion techniques beyond current theoretical limits. The memo is addressed to Lavrenti Beria and warns that these designs, if weaponized, would alter aerial defense strategies indefinitely. The subject code is Zima 12, Russian for Winter 12, the same term later found stamped inside the Lake Ladoga bunker discovered decades later. To connect these threads, GHRP researcher Dr. Sabine Adler traveled to Washington, D.C. in late 2024. There she obtained a brief, off-record meeting with a retired NASA propulsion scientist who had worked on early ion thrusters. His name, Dr. Harold Ames, age 93. In her taped interview, Ames stated quietly, "We didn't invent what we built. We finished what someone else started. There was a German man, quiet, formal, always sickly. Everyone called him Herr A. He came from a base near the sea." When asked if the man could have been Albrecht, Ames shook his head. No, he outranked everyone. Even von Braun listened to him. Adler's findings led to a sealed congressional hearing in early 2025, examining whether certain US propulsion patents originated from classified German material acquired under paperclip. Most records from that session remain secret, but one publicly released summary admits that documents of European origin, pre-1945, contributed to foundational research. The authorship was left deliberately ambiguous. In Germany, the Kammler question has reignited public debate over moral accountability in scientific progress. If he survived, and if Morgenrot's principles truly seeded Cold War propulsion technologies, then much of modern aerospace history rests on a lie buried beneath decades of redaction. Memorial archives in Peenemünde now feature an empty display labeled Engineer Unknown, Data, Redacted. Visitors see only the outline of the Morgenrot. Insignia burned faintly into corroded steel. What remains most haunting is a final communication found among the Peenemünde papers, a note dated 1949, typed on US Department of Defense stationery, unsigned, Phase 4 completed, parameters stable, authorization for further development approved under Halberd directive. Recommend continued anonymity of technical supervisor. Below, in faint pencil, someone had scrawled 3 letters, HKA. Whether this stood for Hans Kammler, Henry K. Amsler, or something else entirely, no historian can say. The only certainty is that Kammler's death certificate remains unverified, and the men who inherited Morgenrot's secrets carried them across oceans, transforming wartime science into the machinery of a new global order. The man who vanished in 1945 may have reappeared under another name, alive, unacknowledged, and written into history, not as a criminal, but as a pioneer. Chapter 5. The Halberd Transmission Archive. In April 2025, following months of speculation and mounting media pressure, a former intelligence technician from RAF Menwith Hill provided investigators with a data cartridge labeled OP Halb 1953-62. Its existence had been a rumor for decades, a Cold War-era recording believed to capture residual transmissions from the European radio network known internally as Operation Halberd. The technician, identified only as Subject R, claimed the cartridge was retrieved from a defunct signal intercept bay, scheduled for demolition. When decrypted using period-accurate decoding software, the contents revealed a series of garbled audio bursts, coordinates, and timestamps between 1951 and 1962, all tagged with a prefix that investigators recognized immediately: Morgenrot. The recovered metadata listed over 40 separate transmissions originating near Peenemünde, the Baltic, and White Sands, New Mexico. Most were typical telemetry chatter, but one file, marked Halb 46, contained a voice transmission dated March 7, 1952. After noise reduction, a faint German accent could be heard reciting test parameters in English. Stage 4. Ignition, pressure nominal, vector stable, proceed to altitude check. Analysts from the GHRP compared the accent to archival recordings of Heinrich Albrecht from a 1943 Peenemünde briefing. The acoustic signature matched at 96% probability. If authentic, it meant the same voice was broadcasting a classified propulsion test across the Atlantic 7 years after the war ended. Documents accompanying the audio, digitized from the original Halberd logs, suggested that these transmissions were not rogue communications, but sanctioned signals transmitted through a covert NATO scientific channel. A surviving memorandum, dated August 1953, addressed to Command Intelligence, Halberd Division, referenced a legacy propulsion matrix originating from German RLM documents, current custodial authority, United States Air Force, Division X. The memo requested the relocation of prototype evaluation to secure atmospheric facility. The coordinates listed corresponded to Holloman Air Force Base, known site of early rocket testing. Declassified USAF test logs confirm multiple, unidentified engine demonstrations conducted under non-standard authorization that same year. Within weeks of the audio's exposure, the Bundesarchiv issued an internal notice prohibiting the use of the term Morgenrot in reference to any ongoing aerospace research. Concurrently, NASA archives were quietly updated to include a legacy propulsion component in their 1952-1954 development catalog. The entry offered no further detail, but its assigned project code, MX774SON2A, was a direct continuation of the experiment cited in Albrecht's correspondence 2 decades earlier. As investigators cross-referenced these updates, another anomaly surfaced: a 1958 patent application for a staged plasma compression engine filed by a private contractor under the name Henry K. Amsler. The patent was immediately classified, never published, and sealed under Executive Order 10501. Publicly, Operation Halberd was described as a Cold War communications experiment. In reality, declassified fragments now point to a network of autonomous listening posts scattered across Europe, designed not to intercept Soviet transmissions, but to relay encrypted telemetry from test facilities hidden across both sides of the Iron Curtain. Evidence recovered from one dismantled station in Vienna revealed that the network remained active until at least 1971, 2 decades after its supposed termination. Inside a rusted cabinet, technicians discovered a series of data reels labeled HKA, Morgenrot Continuation, authorized 1959. When translated, one reel's log entry read simply, "Transmission received, test succeeded, silence maintained." The implications were grave. Historians concluded that the Halberd network functioned as the communication backbone for a clandestine post-war research alliance, a shadow pipeline that allowed the transfer of Morgenrot-derived propulsion data between NATO and select Eastern Bloc operatives. This unspoken détente, existing parallel to public hostility, ensured that certain wartime technologies remained shared secrets. The archive's final transmission, recorded January 14, 1962, featured a brief voice fragment before abruptly cutting to static. Phase 4 complete, initiating Phase 5 protocol. No further transmissions. The following day, US records show a catastrophic explosion at a remote New Mexico test site, classified at the time as a routine fuel mishap. When the GHRP released a partial transcript of the Halberd recordings in late 2025, global reaction was muted but uneasy. Aerospace agencies declined comment. Defense ministries cited national security. Unofficially, several private laboratories began cross-referencing Morgenrot equations with modern plasma propulsion patents. The similarities were undeniable. A new generation of engineers realized that the mathematics underpinning their own systems were rooted in data written in a Peenemünde bunker 80 years prior. The most disturbing revelation, however, came not from the recordings, but from a single photograph attached to the Halberd file. Taken in 1954 at an unidentified airfield, it shows a group of men in lab coats surrounding a tubular device mounted on scaffolding. Among them stands an older figure wearing dark glasses, partially turned from the camera. The photo bears a faint handwritten note on its reverse. Supervisor K. Forensic analysis of facial structure suggests a 91% match to pre-war images of Hans Kammler. Today, the Halberd archive remains sealed under joint NATO-EU classification at an undisclosed facility near Brussels. Its existence is officially denied, yet whispers persist within the aerospace community that fragments of its data continue to guide classified propulsion experiments. The moral debate now haunts the historians who uncovered it. If Morgenrot's technology survives in modern spacecraft, then the frontier of human exploration was built upon a legacy of erased names, vanished engineers, and experiments never meant to see the light of history. Beneath every launch, every ignition flame, echoes a silent transmission first whispered through Halberd's forgotten frequencies, one that began in the shadows of a dying war and never truly stopped.